Hi, welcome to my podcast, Becoming a Cut Flower Grower. I'm your host, Lydia, and I'm here to share my year of growing and selling cut flowers. I'll be giving you the lowdown on everything I'm doing and sharing all the highs and lows, the good times and the inevitable disasters, all in real time. Join me on my cut flower journey, starting right now. Hello, and a very warm welcome to the latest episode. It is Tuesday, the 10th of February, 2026. I hope you're well. I hope you've had a good weekend and not too much rain. First off, thanks to Mel in Kent for getting in touch. She asked a question about pricing, and she also shared some information about how she grows her gorgeous straw flowers, which I'm very impressed with. So I am determined to do better with mine this year. Now, I'm joining you with a hot mug of fruit tea, and tonight's episode is all about pricing. And I know this is a really huge topic, and everybody's always asking about it. They're not asking me. I see online that they're always asking, and I know there's tons of interest. So I thought I would share my perspective on pricing and how I've managed. So if you are a regular listener, you'll know that I am just about to start year two. So year one was my very first year, and 2024 was the era of the trial beds where I just generally messed things around and just had a bit of a go. So 2025, yeah, first year that I actually sold things, and there is virtually no information out there about pricing, or rather freely available information. I've managed to find over the last, I don't know, 15 months or so, a couple of websites, literally two, of British growers who will explicitly state what their prices are. And I guess what I'm saying is stem prices rather than bunch or bouquet prices, because lots of people on their website, lots of growers will say how much they sell their bunches for. And you can get a really good idea across the entire country of how much people are selling their bunches, their subscriptions for. But in terms of stem pricing, it's virtually impossible to find any information. And I guess the stem price is important for a number of reasons, but particularly for somebody like me who is growing to sell wholesale to wedding and event florists or other florists. So it's important for me to work out what the stem price should be. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm criticizing other growers, so bear this in mind when I say what I'm about to say. But some growers are gatekeeping this information and they are selling it because they know it's in high demand. And I think there is definitely some value to this if you are really, really wanting to know about pricing. Now, I haven't been on any of these paid courses about pricing. I did learn a lot when I did my course with Jenny Marks, and she is like the expert. So whatever she says is the gospel. But I do think that as an industry, it would be really helpful if we were more open about our pricing to help new growers when they first start out. So that's why I'm going to talk about it tonight. Full disclaimer here. I say it again, I'm not an experienced long term grower. You probably guessed that from the title of this podcast anyway, but here are my thoughts on this topic. Now, the first thing to say is exactly why pricing feels so difficult. Like, why is it so hard to price our stems? And the first thing is, it's not your fault. It's not my fault. It's not anybody's fault. There is just very little information out there, especially for new growers. And if you have nothing to benchmark against, it's really, really hard. And I've asked fellow growers, I think once or twice in 2025 for what they charged on the very odd occasion, normally when I had a last minute request and it was a stem that I hadn't sold before. And I was panicking a little bit. And I had a couple of answers. And I'm very grateful for the growers that sent me those prices as well, because we don't really share any of our pricing. But the thing to bear in mind if you ask other people is that they may not be charging the right way in the first place. And their production costs of their stems may be higher or lower than yours. And they may also not even be completely honest with you. They might just give you a sort of figure from X amount to Y amount, and you have to sort of guess somewhere in between. And I also made the cardinal sin of asking my wedding and event florist what I should charge when I got stuck on something. And this is really not a good idea because it's a bit like going into a coffee shop and asking for a coffee and they say, well, how much do you think I should charge? You know, It's not a sensible thing to do. And also, she's used to import wholesale prices, and those prices are not translating over to what British growers do. So I would suggest you don't ask around, because you're not guaranteed to get the right answer. Everybody's situation is different, and it can make you look a bit more amatory than perhaps you actually are. So before I got into the nitty-gritty of working out what I should be charging, I thought about how other businesses would charge. So I thought to myself, if I was a hairdresser, what would I charge for cutting or styling somebody's hair? I would have to take into account all of the costs of the business. So that would be the premises, the bills, the staff, the equipment, the signage, my salary, shampoo, conditioner, styling products, and the profit I wanted to get from that business. Now, note that profit that you want is different from your wage. You're going to be paying yourself a wage regardless. The profit is for the business. And if you think about it in the sense that if you fell over and broke your leg and you couldn't do anything for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and you had to pay somebody to do what you do, you need to have your wage already incorporated into the pricing of everything, so that if you are out of action for any reason, someone else can step in, and they're already priced in, so it's not going to impact you financially. And going back to the hairdresser analogy, I would go around every single salon in my area and see exactly what they're charging. Most of them put their price lists on the windows or on the doors, or you can find a little card inside, or you can go on their website. And I would decide what sort of client I wanted. Did I want to be that kind of hairdresser, or do I want to be a posh one or a less posh one? I would have to work out my positioning in the market, and I would make my prices reflect all of those different parameters. Now, you might say, well, Lydia, it's not the same. I don't have a shop on the high street, but the underlying principle is exactly the same. So let's be clear about something else, first of all. The aim of any business is to make money. It has to pay you a proper wage, and that you can live on as well, if that's what you want to do. It's got to make a profit for reinvestment. That's why you need to have your profit factored in, so that you've got money left at the end of the season to repair things, replace things, buy a polytunnel, buy your stock for next year. And it has to cover all of its costs. Now, if that's not what you want, or it's not important to you, or not necessary, then you don't really need to worry about pricing. I mean, I would say don't be careful, don't underprice yourself, because everybody else will get really, really upset that you're distorting the market. But if you are not serious about it, then you really don't need to worry too much. But if you are, then you have to get to grips with the numbers behind the pricing. And there's no way around this. And I'm really sorry to tell you that, but there isn't. So I'm going to talk first about pricing for selling wholesale, which is what I do. And again, it's just based on my experience. And these are the numbers that you, or that I had to start with. And you've got to understand two different types of costs that you have: indirect costs for your business and direct costs. Excuse me. The simplest way of understanding this is, if you never grew a single stem, what would it cost you to just keep the business running? And these are your indirect costs. So this might be the rent on a piece of land or a field, or a mortgage on a property that you own that's got the field attached to it. It'll be any insurance that you have, like public liability or anything like that, all your tools and equipment, depreciation of any assets, website costs, water if you're not on a meter, and electricity, like your standing charges. Now, they're your indirect costs, and they happen regardless of whether you're growing anything or not. And then you've got your direct costs, and these start accruing the minute you start growing anything. And as the name suggests, these costs are directly related to what you do. And if you don't do anything, they wouldn't exist. So, for example, that would be seeds, tubers, corms, bulbs, compost, amendments, netting, paper to wrap your flowers in, labels, string, all those kinds of things. Now, it took me absolutely ages to get my head around direct and indirect costs, absolutely ages. So the way I think about it is like this. I think about them, all of these costs together, in terms of like your home or my home. So if I have a home, which I do have a home, I have certain bills which have to be paid regardless of whether I'm in it or not. And if I went on a year-long cruise, for example, around the world, which would be amazing, certain bills would still have to be paid. And these are your indirect costs. So they would be my mortgage or my rent, my council tax, my TV license, my building and contents insurance, my broadband, my ground rent, my gas boiler servicing, my depreciation on equipment like washing machines or anything. Now, most of us don't think about depreciation on our white goods, but I'm just including it here because you'll have depreciation on assets that you have on a cut flower farm like a greenhouse or polytunnels. Now, all of those bills, all of the indirect costs have to be paid to keep my home running while I'm away on this cruise. But the minute I go back into that house and start living in it, I start generating direct costs. So, for example, it would be the energy, the electricity that I'm using, could be the gas, it could be my water, it would certainly be food, things like toilet rolls, soap, shampoo, light bulbs, those items which are directly going to increase in cost because I am back in that house. Now, it's a bit too simplistic to say that direct costs are variable and indirect costs are fixed because no costs are ever fixed these days. And as you know, broadband seems to go up every 5 minutes these days. But hopefully, you get the point that direct costs will go up the more you do, and they will decrease the less you do. Whereas your indirect costs, like your mortgage and your standing charges, are more likely to stay relatively the same. So you need to start collecting these costs in these two categories. And if you get in a muddle, just imagine you're on that cruise. What do you still have to pay for, even if you're in the Caribbean? And that is an indirect cost. Now, the next part of this is to work out your cost of production for your stems. And this is where it gets really tricky. And if you're new to this, you're simply not going to have this data. And there's nowhere around this. And that's why I'm always collecting data. So it's not just because I'm really geeky, it's because if I don't collect the data, I cannot calculate my cost of production. So I am sorry to say this, like if you are in year one, you're just not going to have this data yet. You either have to estimate it as best as you can, collect every bit of data as you're going along and make your calculations at the end of the season. And then you will be in a position to start pricing more accurately in year two. And if you're thinking, well, what data can I be collecting? This is what I have been collecting. So it's the cost of the seed or cost of bulbs or tubers or corms. It's the cost of any trays if I'm using them. Now, as you know, I recycle household stuff, so I am not going out buying trays. But if you do, it would be the cost of your trays, cost of compost, labels, vermiculite, and the time it took you to start and finish. And if you're starting very small, you could work out how much it costs you to grow each plant and then extrapolate that across the whole season. When you later harvest from that plant, count how many stems you've got, not just how many you sold, but how many the plant produced over the course of its life. And you will then be able to calculate a single stem price. But, and I'm sorry to say this, the data collection doesn't end there because you also need to time how long you spent looking after that plant over the course of the year. So that includes things like bed preparation, weeding, mulching, staking, netting, adding any amendments, harvesting, cutting it back, and clearing out the bed. And you also need to include your time in this. So you're going to need to choose your hourly rate. And I can't advise you on that. I can only go on what I did for myself. And it was slightly less than I would charge out to my clients if I was like doing gardening. But you do have to pick a number. Now, you don't have to stick with it for years and years if it doesn't work. And if you're at a complete loss, then, start from the minimum wage. But if you know yourself that you can't live on the minimum wage, then you're going to have to go higher than that. But whatever you do, don't go any lower than that. And you may wish to calculate these figures on a per square meter basis or on a whole bed basis. It doesn't matter, just do what works for you. So this year I'm doing everything on a per square meter basis just because I thought that would be the easiest way to do it. and now I've got these 4 new beds, it should be a lot easier to do that. Now, you'll often hear big growers talking in terms of beds, and this is because they know the dimensions of that bed off the top of their head. They know how many plants they'll put into it in the same year, year after year after year, and how many stems they're going to get from that bed. Now, if you're really big, this is going to be easy, but if you are small, you need to calculate on the scale that you are comfortable with. And by the end of the season or the life of that particular crop, you should know how many stems you've cut. And again, before we piece it all together, you need to make sure that you've got your indirect and your direct costs for whatever space that crop took up. So let me give you an example here. And I have made all the figures up, but it's just a working example. Say your plot is 100 square meters and your indirect costs, say you grew cornflowers in a 10 square meter bed, right? And your whole plot is 100 square meters. So you've put 10% of it over to cornflowers. Your indirect costs, the fixed ones, are going to be 10% of the figure because you're growing cornflowers in just 10% of your overall growing space. Your direct costs are going to be whatever it actually costs you to produce those cornflowers in that 10 square meter bed. So let's say, for argument's sake, your cornflower bed's indirect costs were £100 and your direct costs were also £100 and you produced 1,000 cornflower stems. So total cost, £200 for 1,000 stems. £200 divided by 1,000 is 20 pence per stem. So let me say again, I made all these numbers up, but it's just to show you how these calculations get done. So 20 pence a stem is what it costs you to produce that one single cornflower stem. If you sold it for 20 pence, you would break even, but absolutely nothing more. It would cover your indirect costs, your direct costs, and your labor, but it wouldn't cover anything else. So you wouldn't get anywhere. You'd literally just be breaking even. So this is where the next tricky bit comes in, which is the margins. So we add margins on to this stem price, this 20 pence made up price for the cornflowers. And I would need to add a margin on this, and it depends on who I'm selling the stem to. Now, you know that I'm predominantly selling wholesale to wedding and event florists. So the margin for wholesale is smaller than if you sell to retail customers at a market. And as a very rough guide, the wholesale price is twice the cost of production, and ideally 2.5 to 3 times to actually grow the business. Now, as I've just discovered when I did all of these calculations and having done Jenny Marks's course, I'm going to have to sell a lot of stems wholesale to make any money. And I may well have made a mistake because I just don't have enough space and I'm not very efficient at maximizing the space yet. So if I sold everything wholesale with a 2 times markup on the cost of production per stem, it's going to take me a lifetime to achieve absolutely anything. Now, you might be surprised when you do these calculations to see the true cost per stem. And you also might be equally frustrated because you just don't have the data needed to make these calculations. And this is a significant challenge for new growers. And there just isn't any way that I have seen of getting around this. You have got to get a handle on your numbers. Now, you might be thinking, but I'm not growing to wholesalers. I'm selling retail to customers at markets or at a stall outside my property. So now what do I do? Well, you still have to know your costs because although it's a bit easier to know how much to actually sell your bouquets for, if you don't know your costs, you could either be underpricing or making a loss. So as I said, having crunched through my numbers, I don't think I'm going to be able to sell enough stems at a wholesale price, which is twice the cost of production, at least, in 2026 to make my financial goal. So I had been thinking that I would start selling at local markets and maybe even do a subscription service, but that's a whole new thing for my brain to get wrapped around. So I want to talk to you now about pricing your bouquets, but I have to say, this is all just based on research that I have done. It's not experience, not based on experience. So you have to work out the value of this information for yourself. The way I'm going to be doing it is market research. So I am literally going to have to find out what other people are charging. And this is very important, what people will actually pay. Because customers now are very used to cheap supermarket flowers. They are far too used to them, in fact. And they might actually be shocked to discover what a real bunch of British grown flowers costs from a business that has to not only support itself, but support the owners and be sustainable and, in fact, actually grow over time. And they might not even want to pay these prices, in which case I will have to reevaluate, because I can't cut the cost of the bouquets, because I don't want to go bust. But if they are not prepared to pay those prices, then it could be that it's not the market for me and they are not my customer. So I'm going to be going around everywhere. I've already started this, actually, everywhere that sells flowers locally, and write all of these prices down. I'll be counting the number of stems in the bunches, and I'll be making a note of what types of flowers are used. For example, are they heavy on focals? Are they full of fillers? Have they got like one rose stem in there? How much foliage is in there? What sort of packaging is used? Are there ribbons and bows and labels and information cards? How fancy is the branding in the packaging? Is it a really incredible spiral hand tie? Is it a straight bunch of one variety of flowers? Or is it a collection of flowers, but they're not arranged in a fancy spiral? They're just sort of put together loosely and packaged up. And I'm going to be asking myself if my marketplace, my potential customers, would pay more for what I have. And I have to be realistic, but also optimistic. I want to aim high with this. Now, going back briefly to the problems caused by the supermarket prices, customers often don't realize that flowers are loss leaders for supermarkets. They're put in the front of the store so that you're greeted with this really amazing display, but they are designed really to lure you in and give the idea of freshness. People often don't really know that the whole way that supermarkets are arranged and organized is to manipulate the way that we behave in them. It's why bread is always hidden right at the back of the store, and milk normally as well. So you have to traipse through the entire store to pick up what you need. And this even applies in the mini convenience stores, like the tiny little shops that you get on the high street. They also hide the bread and the milk right at the back of the shop. It's why the cheapest goods are always on the bottom shelf, and why fresh items are always by the doors. And there are lots of reasons why supermarket flowers, and indeed the imports, are cheap. And that is primarily because the supermarkets use them to lure you in, and they'll take a hit on the pricing. And because the labor is often cheap where these flowers actually originate from. Kenyan workers, I guarantee it, are not being paid £30 an hour. And they certainly don't have anything like the protection, the health and safety regulations that companies in the UK would have to comply with, and therefore there are costs associated with that. The imports are also grown on a vast scale, absolutely vast. So that also brings the prices down due to the savings that you get when you're growing on a really big scale. And the land prices and the living costs are so much cheaper than they are here in the UK. So British growers, we are not competing on the same playing field as the imports. So this is to sum up the retail pricing of it and what I'm going to be doing. I will know how much it costs me to produce the stems, certainly by the end of 2026. I will know what other people are charging for their bouquets, and I will also be trying to work out what the market will actually pay me and what margin I'll be putting on the stems when I produce them. So, popping back to the cornflowers for a second, my cost of production, you'll remember, was 20 pence a stem. My wholesale margin is double that, so that would be 40 pence a stem, and that would be the absolute minimum. Ideally, it would be 3 times as much, but that is still just to what am I saying? That is still just the wholesale margin on that. And the retail margin apparently is somewhere around 4 or 5 times the cost of production. So that would work out at 80 pence or £1 a stem for these cornflowers. Now, I must stress again that I made all of these numbers up just so that I had a really easy calculation to do in my head. That's not the pricing that it actually costs and not what I charge. It was literally just for that calculation. And there are very good reasons why retail has a much higher margin. There are lots of additional costs when you sell to retail customers. I don't have experience of this because I haven't done it yet, but I understand that there is going to be the time spent actually selling them. And if I go to a market, for example, a lot of them start at 8 and you are required to be on site till 2. So that's 6 hours of me standing there, hoping that people are going to buy them, not including the hour it's going to take me at least to get the bouquets there, get the stall all set up, and the hour it's going to take to pack everything up back in the van, drive it home, and unload and deal with all the flowers. So that's a huge amount of time that it's actually going to cost me to sell those bouquets. And even if you sold at a farm stand at the end of your driveway, you've still got to stock it, unstock it, tidy it, clean it, create all the display materials, market it, take the payments, handle the cash, or have a card system. You've still got to wrap your bouquets in paper or whatever else you use. And the costs will soon mount up, which is why the retail product is so much more expensive than wholesale. When it's wholesale, I say I just, but it's a much simpler system, as you can imagine. I literally go out and I harvest the stems, I put them in buckets, the florists collect them from me. So there's very, very little for me to do apart from grow them, cut them, store them, and be on site for the collection, all of which costs money because it takes up my time. Now, back to the wholesale pricing, because that's all I know at the moment. I did find it ridiculously hard work in 2025. I'm not going to lie to you. I absolutely haven't cracked it yet. And there are some flowers that I grew in 25 that I've got numbers for that I decided not to do in 26. So all of that data is of no particular use. And I didn't collect anywhere near enough data. Now, nobody is saying you need to record every single breath that you take on your field, because that nobody's going to do that. It's daft. But you've got to have a realistic idea of, say, how long it's going to take you to harvest, say, 50 or 100 stems, or if you're smaller than that, 20 or 50 stems. And some flowers are much easier to harvest than others. So single stemmed ones, some flowers, you just go and cut them down, plonk them in a bucket, super easy. Even the dahlias are quite quick to harvest. But things like the scabious, which are all kind of twisty and there's a lot more to ferret about getting the right stem and cutting at the right point. So some flowers will take longer times to harvest than others. So that, I hope, is helpful for you. I'm sorry it's not a more concise answer. I've been so frustrated with this when I first started. I'm getting a little bit more understanding about what it's like now that I'm a year in. But there just aren't any quick fixes. And even if somebody that was growing 10 minutes down the road from you said, oh, well, I'll email you my price list, you could look at those stem prices and think, well, they're incredibly expensive, they'll be really hard for me to sell, or they're incredibly cheap, mine are more expensive than that. You'll just get into a vortex of doom, I think, if you do that, because until you understand your costs of production, your direct and indirect costs, and your own personal hourly rate, and your unique circumstances, which of course feed into those costs, you cannot price properly until you understand that. Yes, you could make all the prices up based on what someone else is doing. But if your costs of production are very high, perhaps because you're new or because you buy loads of stuff or you get a bit carried away and it's actually costing you, say £20 to produce a bunch of dahlias and you sell them for 15 because someone else is selling them for 15, you're going to be making a loss. And that's not sustainable. We're not in the business of subsidizing customers that want to buy our flowers. We are growing a fantastic, valuable British product, and it will cost what it costs. And what we have to convey to the market is the value in buying our product. We cannot benchmark ourselves against the imports, and we can't benchmark ourselves against other people. We have to put the work in. So start collecting your data this year. Think about what you're going to be collecting. Get a notepad or a notebook or somewhere, do it on your phone, and start making a note of things. And if you could follow it through for 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 particular crops from start to finish, you'll have some really valuable data at the end of the year. Make sure you keep all your receipts for everything as well. Try and be as organized as you can. It's very, very businessy, this. It's, growing the flowers is such a small part of the overall enterprise. Now, I say again, if you don't need the money, then you don't need to worry about it so much. But if you do, if you want this to become an income stream, if you want this to become something that you can actually live off and support you and support itself, then you've got to get to grips with the numbers. And I do hope I haven't depressed you too much. I know it's possibly not the answer that you were hoping for, but this is the way to do it. So good luck with it. Don't feel overwhelmed. Just make a start and collect as much data as you possibly can to crunch those figures. And if you've got any questions, drop me a DM on Instagram, or my website is listed in the show notes, and you can send me an email and I'll be happy to answer your questions on a future episode of the podcast. So please come back and join me on Friday for the next episode. I will be continuing the plant profile series, and I'm going to be doing Craspedia, my little yellow golf balls on sticks. I'm telling you all about my experiences of growing those. So I very much hope that you'll come back and join me on Friday. All the best.